Here is a fact that nobody disputes. Walk into almost any high-rise hotel in the world. New York, London, Toronto, Sydney. Step into the elevator and press the button for the 13th floor. You can't because it isn't there. Not labeled 13 anyway. The building still has that floor. The concrete still exists. The structural steel bears the exact same load. The plumbing rushes through the walls and human beings sleep in the beds suspended exactly 13 stories above the pavement. But officially, institutionally, that specific slice of physical reality does not exist. We have accepted this. We have normalized it so thoroughly that the absence no longer registers as an anomaly to the modern mind. A child riding an elevator might look at the panel and ask, well, why does it go from 12 to 14? And the adult, embarrassed, half laughing, will offer the only answer they've ever been given. Oh, 13 is unlucky. But why is it unlucky? That is where this story begins. Because the deeper you look into the architecture of our daily lives, the more you realize the answer to that question isn't superstition, it is strategy. Before we can understand what was erased, we have to understand what existed. 13 is not an arbitrary number. It is not a random cultural mistake. The erasure of 13 from our buildings is only the most visible layer, the surface residue of an operation that runs much deeper. Pull back far enough, look beyond the steel and the concrete, and a much larger picture begins to emerge. An erasure not just from architecture, but from calendars, from mathematics, from music theory, from the fundamental structure of Western timekeeping itself. I want you to really think about the sheer bureaucratic effort required to remove a number from a building. Not one building in one city, thousands of buildings, tens of thousands. Hotels, hospitals, towering corporate office blocks, sprawling international airports, all of them following the exact same convention, all of them skipping the exact same number, simultaneously, consistently, across entirely different countries, languages, and cultures. And here is the strangest part of all. Nobody issued a formal decree. There is no international law requiring builders to skip the 13th floor. There is no binding global architectural standard. There is no signed treaty. The coordinated silence is deafening. We are told that this happened organically. We are asked to believe that individual builders, independent architects, and isolated hotel managers all independently decided, based entirely on the general public's vague superstition, to permanently alter the numerical reality of their multi-million-dollar structures. This raises a simple but highly critical question. When in human history has a mere superstition ever produced that level of standardized, coordinated, and sustained behavioral change without some organizing force actively driving it behind the scenes? Look at the aviation industry. Many major international airlines skip row 13 entirely. If you ask for the official explanation, the public relations response is always passenger comfort. They claim people simply feel uneasy sitting in that row, but this logic immediately collapses under the slightest scrutiny. These are the exact same airlines that board passengers into claustrophobic middle seats. The same airlines that systematically strip away legroom year after year. The same airlines that charge exorbitant fees for a bottle of water and routinely pack human beings into pressurized aluminum tubes with the exact spatial comfort of livestock transport. They are not optimizing for your psychological comfort. They are optimizing for something else entirely. Look at global sports. In Formula One racing, for years, no single car bore the number 13. The 1976 season is particularly striking to anyone who takes the time to look closely at the rosters. NASCAR has had extended multi-year periods where 13 was simply absent from the starting grid. It wasn't retired in honor of a great driver who died on the track. It wasn't reserved for a VIP sponsor. It was simply absent, as if the number itself had been quietly walked out the back door, executed in the alleyway, and buried while everyone was looking the other way. The pattern repeats, it accumulates. And accumulation is the exact point where superstition stops being a valid explanation and starts becoming a symptom of a localized disease. To find the origin of that disease, we have to go deeper. We have to look up at the sky. For thousands of years across ancient civilizations that had absolutely no physical contact with one another, the number 13 occupied a position of profound foundational significance. It was not feared. It was not avoided. It was honored. Consider the lunar calendar. The moon, the most visible, predictable celestial body in the night sky, completes approximately 13 full cycles in a single solar year. 13, not 12, not 14. 13 lunar months fit within a natural Earth year far more accurately and far more organically than 12 ever could. And yet, virtually every dominant timekeeping system in use on the planet today is built entirely around 12 months. We have awkward 30-day and 31-day months precisely because someone, somewhere, had to artificially stretch the mathematical reality to make a 12-month system function. Think about February. February sits there in the middle of winter, awkward, truncated, bleeding days. It is a patch job. It is the visible arithmetic scar of an empire forcing a 12-month bureaucratic system onto a 13-month astronomical reality. If you track the moon from full moon to full moon, a period called a lunation, it takes approximately 29.5 days. Multiply 29.5 by 13, and you get 383.5 days. A standard solar year is 365.25 days. The math doesn't divide cleanly either way. Nature rarely offers perfectly round numbers. But here's the detail that historians routinely gloss over. The 13-month lunar calendar requires dramatically fewer corrections, fewer sweeping adjustments, and fewer clumsy leap day patches than the 12-month system. And yet the 12-month system won. It won globally. It conquered the planet completely without any serious institutional competition for the past several centuries. Who benefits from a timekeeping system that requires constant maintenance, top-down correction, and centralized management? Keep that question in the back of your mind. We will return to it. The 13-month calendar was not a theoretical concept debated by ancient philosophers. It was lived reality. The ancient Mayans, possessing a mathematical sophistication that still baffles modern astronomers, tracked 13 as the absolute foundational unit of their sacred calendar. The Tzolk'in, their master chronological architecture, was a 260-day cycle built entirely on 13 numbers, cycling seamlessly through 20 distinct day signs. This was not decorative mythology. This was hard, observable astronomy. This was a timekeeping mechanism of terrifying precision. When you study the Mayan ruins, when you realize that the Tzolk'in accurately predicted the orbital cycles of Venus, solar zenith passages, and exact eclipse seasons centuries before European telescopes existed, you are forced to ask a dangerous question. Why would a civilization capable of that level of mathematical genius choose 13 as their base unit unless 13 was the number that actually worked? They were not alone. The Aztecs built their world around it. The ancient Egyptians recognized exactly 13 stages in the grueling journey of the soul towards spiritual ascension. 13, not 12, not 10. Their entire cosmological framework, the deep, Assyrian mysteries that govern life and death along the Nile, included a vital 13th component that represented ultimate transformation, the threshold between states of being. To the Egyptians, the 13th step was the exact moment of becoming. In Sumerian cosmology, arguably the oldest literate civilization we have physical evidence of, clay tablets recovered from the buried ruins of ancient Mesopotamia reference highly complex numerical systems. Systems that treated 13 as a cosmic pivot point, the exact numerical frequency at which grand cycles completed, exhausted themselves, and renewed. These clay tablets predate the Old Testament. They predate classical Greece by millennia. And yet their underlying mathematical framework has been studied by almost nobody outside of incredibly narrow, painfully obscure academic circles. Why? The deeper I dug into the historical record, the more I noticed something chilling. I began to notice not just what was present in the archives, but what was conspicuously missing. I found glaring gaps in the scholarly literature. I found modern translations of ancient texts that entirely elided certain numerical references. I found prominent cuneiform scholars who noted, always buried at the bottom of the page in tiny footnotes, that certain numerical passages in the recovered tablets resist conventional interpretation. What does that actually mean in plain English? It means the numbers on the ancient stone do not fit the 12-base system modern academics are forcing onto them. The official explanation collapses right there on the desk, not because the ancient clay tablets are damaged, not because the original Sumerian scribes made mathematical errors, but because our modern interpretive framework was deliberately built around entirely different numbers than the ones the original untampered culture was using. You can find the exact same anomaly in the ancient Celtic world. The ancient Druidic calendar operated strictly on 13 months. Each month was named for a specific sacred tree. Each month corresponded perfectly to a distinct lunar cycle. We know this because of the Coligny calendar. Discovered in France in 1897, the Coligny calendar is a massive shattered bronze artifact. It is one of the longest, most pristine surviving documents in any Celtic language. And carved into that bronze is a highly sophisticated lunisolar timekeeping system that incorporates 13 as its absolute, fundamental, unbreakable unit. It was, by every strict archaeological assessment, a calendar of breathtaking high precision. The expanding Roman Empire encountered this calendar when they marched into Gaul. And within just a few short generations of Roman military consolidation, the Druidic calendar was gone. It was not adapted. It was not politely absorbed into the Roman way of life. It was eradicated. But a dominant power cannot simply erase a population's concept of time and leave a vacuum. If you want to replace a culture's calendar, if you want to violently impose a 12-month system and convince the conquered people that their old system was primitive, pagan, and superstitious, then something highly specific has to happen to the old numbers. 13 cannot just be forgotten. It must be made strange. 13 must become the number that doesn't fit, the number that makes people uncomfortable, the number that is conspicuously absent from the standard clock face, from the newly printed calendar, from the towering building directory. The human mind is an evolutionary machine built for pattern recognition. It is extraordinarily sensitive to pattern disruption. When a number is systematically removed from a society's environment, the subconscious mind begins to register that missing number as an anomaly, and the mind inherently fears anomalies. The anomaly becomes dangerous, not because of anything inherently dark or evil within the number itself, but simply because it has been deliberately forced to stand outside the approved system. The modern fear of 13, the hesitation you feel before booking a hotel room on that floor, is not a natural fear of a number. It is the psychological residue of a deliberate systematic exclusion. It is a trained aversion. It is an engineered absence. We see the exact same engineered absence in the ancient Greek and Roman pantheons. We are taught in every primary school that the Greeks had exactly 12 Olympian gods. It is a clean, manageable, deeply symmetrical number. But if you dig into several recovered, pre-classical sources, the fragmented texts that survived the purges, there are startling references to a 13th figure, a deity present at the most ancient councils, present at the foundational mythological events of the Greek world. And then, as the centuries progress, that 13th figure is quietly written out, absorbed into the attributes of another deity, renamed, erased. The modern scholarly consensus treats this as natural mythological evolution, just stories changing over time. But what if it isn't evolution at all? What if it is editorial revision? What if someone at some pivotal point in Antiquity decided that 12 was a cleaner, more governable number and actively removed the 13th? Not a natural drift of folklore, removal. To achieve this level of erasure, you need more than just societal pressure. You need destruction. One of the most terrifying features of this historical investigation is how incredibly abrupt the global transition was. Cultures that had used 13-based timekeeping for hundreds of generations, in some cases for millennia, switched to 12-based systems with remarkably little documented resistance. The historical record of this transition is paper-thin. But it is not thin because the transition was peaceful, gradual, or unremarkable. The record is thin because the documentation itself was subjected to the exact same violent editing process as the calendars. When the Spanish missionaries arrived in Mesoamerica, they immediately encountered the hyper-accurate 13-based Aztec calendar system. The missionaries documented it. They studied it. And then, under strict institutional orders, those exact same missionaries oversaw the systematic, blazing destruction of the Aztec codices, the sprawling, intricate folding books in which centuries of advanced astronomical knowledge were recorded. We know This happened because the missionaries bragged about it in their own surviving letters back to Europe. They wrote, "Iana Dornanum," with immense pride, that they had gathered and burned what they called the books of the devil. Tawakun. Know those books contain calendrical and astronomical information of staggering complexity. But we do not know precisely what equations, what lunar maps, and what cosmic histories those books contained. Because they no longer exist, they were not lost to the slow decay of time. They were not damaged by a careless weather event or crossfire in a territorial war. They were gathered in the public squares, piled high, and burned deliberately. The great Library of Antioch, gone. The ancient sweeping books of the Druids, which Julius Caesar himself had documented in his war journals as being incredibly sophisticated and dangerously extensive, gone. The legendary Library of Alexandria, holding the accumulated knowledge of the ancient world, not an accidental fire, not tragic neglect, gone. In every single historical instance where a 13-based culture collided with a 12-based empire, the result was catastrophic data loss. What survived? The fires was heavily curated. What was preserved for future generations to study was selectively chosen by the victors, chosen by someone for very specific reasons. The deeper I went into the archives, the more horrified I became by a singular realization. What we proudly call the historical record is not a record at all. It is a highly manicured selection. And in that selection, 13-based knowledge systems appear with striking, almost impossible rarity. Not because they were rare in the ancient world, they were everywhere. They appear rare today because they were absolutely not the systems that those doing the selecting wanted preserved. The silence wasn't an accident. The silence was the goal. But erasing a number from architecture or burning it out of a library is only phase one. Erasing a number from a building is a physical act. Erasing it from human consciousness, making sure no one ever tries to bring it back, requires a psychological weapon. To permanently kill the number 13, you cannot just remove it from the calendar. You have to make the population genuinely afraid. To speak its name, you have to take something that the ancients viewed as mathematically sacred, as the pinnacle of cosmic transformation, and you have to make it feel fundamentally wrong, dangerous, cursed. You have to invent a superstition so powerful it outlasts the empire that created it. Let us examine the mechanism of fear. Because erasing a number from the physical architecture of a city is one thing, erasing it from the collective consciousness of a species is entirely different. To do that, you don't just physically remove the number. You have to make the population actively police the erasure for you. You have to take a concept that ancient, highly advanced civilizations viewed as mathematically sacred, and you have to make it feel instinctively wrong. You have to make it feel cursed. The most commonly cited origin for the superstition surrounding the number 13 is the Last Supper. 13 people seated at the table, with one ultimate world-shattering betrayal to follow. It is a powerful narrative. It is deeply ingrained in the Western psyche, but here is what is rarely, if ever, discussed in the historical literature. The narrative of the Last Supper was formally recorded, codified, and heavily disseminated through the exact same institutional forces that were simultaneously marching across continents, violently replacing indigenous, 13-based calendrical systems with a 12-month Roman model. The exact same institutional force that strictly promoted the 12-month calendar was the exact same force that codified the story of 13 as the definitive number of treachery and death. I am not explicitly claiming pure causation here, but I am noting a staggering, undeniable correlation. I am asking you to consider if it is merely a coincidence that the single number which posed the greatest mathematical threat to a 12-based institutional empire was the exact same number that miraculously got assigned a global narrative of doom. We have taken this engineered fear so far that it even has a formal clinical name today, triskaidekaphobia. We have medicalized the avoidance of a number. We have given it a sterile Greek etymology. We have constructed a formal diagnostic framework around it, complete with peer-reviewed academic papers endlessly, analyzing its prevalence in modern populations. The number 13 has been so thoroughly pathologized, so deeply buried under layers of clinical anxiety and societal reinforcement, that fearing it actually seems rational, and not fearing it seems naive. This raises a critical question. At what precise point does a mere superstition become so systematically reinforced, so heavily funded, and so globally distributed that it ceases to be folklore and officially functions as policy? Because when major international airlines deliberately skip an entire row of seats, when multi-billion-dollar hospitals skip they are not acting on personal belief. A corporation does not have a subconscious to feel fear. They are acting on strict institutional convention. And institutional conventions do not emerge organically from peasant superstition. They are engineered. The modern architects who draft the blueprints without a 13th floor are acting exactly as if they were following ancient, deeply embedded instructions that they themselves do not fully understand. To understand those instructions, we have to look at the mathematics of control. A 12-based world is a world that divides differently, measures differently, and ultimately thinks differently than a 13-based one. Look at the number 12. 12 divides perfectly and evenly by 2, by 3, by 4, and by 6. 12 is a bureaucrat's absolute dream. It is a number optimized from the ground up for clean division. It is optimized for the rigid categorization of labor, for the reliable extraction of taxation, for strict measurement, and for absolute centralized control. We have 12 inches in a foot. We have 12 months in a standard year. We have 12 hours cleanly mirroring each other on a mechanical clock face. We buy items in dozens. We place exactly 12 members on a jury to decide a human being's fate. The entire invisible architecture of modern institutional life is meticulously built in 12s. Now look at 13. 13 does not divide cleanly. It is a prime number. It is mathematically indivisible except by itself in one. It cannot be fractured into perfectly equal, manageable shifts. It cannot be cleanly quartered for quarterly tax reports. And here is the strangest, most haunting part of this entire investigation. That mathematical indivisibility, that stubborn resistance to clean bureaucratic division, may have been precisely what made the number 13 so incredibly sacred to older, more organic cultures. It is a number that cannot be systematically broken down. It is a number that cannot be divided and subsequently controlled. It is a number that fundamentally resists the exact kind of rigid, top-down systems inherently designed to divide and control human populations. I am speculating here, and I want to be entirely clear about that. But the overwhelming historical pattern of what was violently erased compared directly to what was aggressively promoted suggests something far more sinister than arbitrary cultural drift. It suggests a highly deliberate, multi-century preference for mathematical systems that enable mass management, mass measurement, and mass standardization, and it required the total eradication of systems that preserved older, wilder, more organic cycles. The books of the devil, as the Spanish missionaries called them, had to be burned, not because they contained literal demonic rituals, but because they contained the complex astronomical mathematics of a 13-based reality. Reality that proved the empire's new 12-month calendar was a clumsy, artificial fabrication. But here is the beautiful, terrifying thing about truth. Once you see the erasure, you cannot unsee it. The traces remain. They always do. You cannot entirely delete a foundational mathematical reality from the human story without leaving scars. Reach into your pocket, pull out a $1 bill. Look at the original Great Seal of the United States, still printed on the most widely circulated instrument of global commerce in the history of the world. The Great Seal is absolutely saturated with the number 13. Count them. There are exactly 13 stars glowing above the eagle's head. There are exactly 13 stripes on the central shield. The eagle clutches exactly 13 arrows of a war in its left talon. It grips an olive branch bearing exactly 13 leaves of peace in its right. Turn the seal over. Look at the unfinished pyramid. There are exactly 13 massive stone levels building up to the floating eye. The official historical explanation for this is deeply convenient. 13 original colonies. A simple patriotic homage. But the founding fathers who meticulously designed that seal were not simply politicians. They were elite scholars of classical history. They were deep students of ancient dead languages. Many were deeply embedded in esoteric, highly secretive traditions that actively studied the very knowledge the dominant empires had spent centuries trying to erase. They appear to have known something profound about the true nature of 13. They knew it was not a number of bad luck. They knew it was the number of ultimate transformation, of indivisible strength, of architectural foundation. They knew exactly what the dominant culture of their era was actively suppressing, and they encoded it anyway. They permanently stamped the forbidden number into the official, undying symbol of a brand new nation. Why? The unfinished pyramid, with its 13 heavy tiers of masonry and the all-seeing eye hovering above. It remains one of the most hotly debated symbols in modern iconography. And yet, almost none of that intense global debate ever focuses on the number itself. We argue endlessly about the eye. We argue about Illuminati symbolism. We argue about hidden Masonic influence. We do not argue about the 13 because the number 13 has been so incredibly successfully framed as unlucky, as merely superstitious, as completely beneath serious intellectual inquiry, that its incredibly deliberate, repeated inclusion in a nation's founding document doesn't even register as mathematically significant to the modern observer. The evidence of this hidden architectural reverence exists far beyond the paper of a dollar bill. It is carved directly into the bedrock of the earth. Travel to the ancient temple complexes stretching across Mesoamerica. You will find massive stone structures built with exactly 13 levels. You will find towering pyramids with exactly 13 terraces. You will find sacred, elevated ceremonial platforms that can only be reached by climbing exactly 13 steps. Look at Chichen Itza. The breathtaking El Castillo pyramid was built with such staggering astronomical precision that it physically interacts with the solar system. During the exact moments of the spring and autumn equinoxes, the angle of the sun casts a deeply specific shadow down the northern balustrade. That shadow creates the perfect optical illusion of a massive, undulating serpent sliding down the stone. And the body of that serpent is formed by exactly 13 geometric triangles of light and dark. 13, appearing at the precise, razor-thin, astronomical moment when the Earth's solar year officially turns. It is exactly as if the ancient builders physically encoded a perfect 13-base calendar directly into the unyielding architecture of the stone itself. A calendar that the Iuwidhu massive structure would proudly demonstrate to the world every single year, automatically, relentlessly, without requiring human maintenance, without requiring bureaucratic leap year patches, and without needing a single word of explanation. Who were they speaking to? What mathematical truth were they trying to preserve in the stone? And most importantly, when exactly did we stop listening? I began this entire investigation with a very simple, mundane observation. A number had been quietly removed from the elevator panel of a hotel. I expected a very simple, mundane answer, a harmless cultural habit, a lingering medieval superstition, nothing more. What I found instead was a thread, and every single time I pulled that thread, more of the official narrative came loose. I found a highly accurate lunar calendar violently replaced by a clumsy solar one. I found ancient, sacred astronomical knowledge rounded up and burned in public squares. I found a prime number that brilliant cultures across 6 different continents treated as cosmologically foundational, systematically, globally reframed as cursed. I found a bizarre architectural convention, skipping a physical floor in a skyscraper, that has absolutely no legal basis whatsoever, yet has somehow achieved total, unquestioned global consistency. I found massive, sprawling institutional systems, aviation, modern medicine, international hospitality, global motorsport, all of them quietly, ruthlessly enforcing the complete removal of a single number with no formal treaty, no signed agreement, and absolutely no public conversation. The official explanation asks us to blindly accept that this coordinated, cross-cultural, institutionally enforced disappearance of a specific mathematical integer is the result of nothing more than accumulated folklore. We are asked to believe it is just a silly ghost story that somehow convinced the greatest architects and engineers on Earth to alter the physical numbering of their concrete structures. I find that the official explanation requires significantly more blind faith than the alternative. And the alternative is this. Someone at some point in our deep history intimately understood that the specific way a culture counts its time fundamentally shapes the specific way that culture thinks. They understood that a population synchronized to natural lunar cycles, to 13-month biological rhythms, to the wild, indivisible prime pulse of the natural world, is a population deeply connected to something that inherently resists external management. They understood that disconnecting humanity from the calendar, disconnecting them from the natural count, and disconnecting them from the number 13 itself was not merely incidental to the grand project of global standardization. It was the project. This raises one final haunting question, a question that should linger in the back of your mind the next time you step into an elevator and look at the gap between 12 and 14. What exactly would we know about time? What would we deeply understand about organic cycles, about the natural world, and about the hidden capabilities of ourselves if we had simply been allowed to keep counting to 13? What ancient visceral knowledge lives inside? The 13-month lunar cycle that the 12-month solar calendar simply cannot hold? What profound understanding of human biological rhythms, of agricultural seasons, of the very fabric of existence, was meticulously encoded into the exact frameworks that were burned and erased? The human body evolved alongside the moon for over 100,000 years. Our deepest biological rhythms are tied to its gravity, to its light, to its pull. What does the human animal lose when its dominant culture legally forces it to stop counting the moons? I do not have the absolute answer to that question, and perhaps tragically that is the entire point. Perhaps the most brilliantly effective form of historical erasure isn't the one that violently destroys the knowledge itself. Perhaps the most effective erasure is the one that makes the core question seem utterly ridiculous. The kind of psychological conditioning that makes highly educated people embarrassed to even ask. The kind of conditioning that makes prominent scholars deeply reluctant to publish their findings. The kind of invisible pressure that makes a brilliant architect quietly skip from 12 to 14 on a set of blueprints without a single second thought. Because everyone knows that 13 is just unlucky. It's just an old superstition. There is absolutely nothing to see there. Move along. The deeper I went into the dark, hidden architecture of this numerical suppression, the more mathematically impossible it became to view any of this as an accident. The scale is too grand. The coordination is too precise. The silence is too perfect. It was a deliberate theft. A theft of time, a theft of rhythm, a theft of human alignment with the natural world. And now you have seen it too.